Good afternoon. Today is, what day is it? Today is May 18th, Wednesday, Energy and Environment Committee. I'm joined by Mr. Mitch O'Farrell. We are waiting for a quorum, but that does not prevent us from beginning as a subcommittee. So we will go ahead and start as a subcommittee and hear item, oh, Mr. Blumenfield's here. Very good, Mr. Blumenfield. Since you're here and we have a quorum, if there's no objection, I would like to take items 4 through 9 on consent.
No objections.
Any cards, Madam Clerk?
No.
Very good. So those items are deemed approved. That takes us to item number 1.
Item number 1. Item number 1 relates to DWP report relative to transmittal of the Department of Water and Power's 2016-17 budget. We have staff from the Department of Water and Power, as well as the OPA.
Howdy.
Good afternoon, council members. Jeff Peltola, Chief Financial Officer for DWP. I'll let Neil introduce.
Neil Guglielmo, good afternoon. Budget Rates and Financial Planning for Water and Power.
Mike Webster, Power System Director for LADWP.
Marty Adams, Senior Assistant General Manager for the Water System.
So what we have before you is the final budget that was approved by our board yesterday. I'll just make one comment, and Neil will get into the details. This budget is consistent with the rates that were passed and have now been implemented for a month and 3 days. And Neil will walk through there. While there's some small changes in there, the overall rates still remain what was proposed and approved by City Council. With that, I'll turn it over to Neil.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. So, for the fiscal year 2016-17 final budget for the Department of Water and Power, the budget reflects our key priorities, which were discussed during the rate action period, specifically planned infrastructure investment, compliance with mandates and transitioning those water and power supplies, as well as improving customer service and doing all of those things while trying to keep our rates as affordable as possible. One thing I want to highlight, when we prepare the final budget, you'll actually see a slight decrease. We prepare our 5-year financial plans. The final case, or financial case for the budget, as compared to the final case used for the rates, shows a reduction of roughly 0.165% for power. And for water, that change is a reduction of roughly 0.3% for water. So slight reductions in the overall costs to our customers. In terms of the priority outcome areas, every year the departments work very closely with the Mayor's office in trying to align our budgetary changes with the Mayor's overall goals and strategy for the city. The proposed budget that we have now been approved by our board does conform to the Mayor's 4 priority outcome areas, making Los Angeles the best run big city, job creation and promotion and retention, as well as creating a more livable and sustainable environment for our citizens, and then ensuring our communities are the safest in the nation. In terms of the budget development status, under City Charter Section 511, we prepare and present to our board the annual receipts and appropriations documentation, which then gets submitted to your August body and to the mayor every year. We came before our board in March and received approval to transmit the preliminary budget, and we went to the board yesterday on the final budget. So in terms of some of the highlights from our preliminary budget in March to our final budget now in May, for the Water Revenue Fund, we had some decreases in the capital and operation and maintenance budgets, primarily due to customer relationship management system, mail remittance processing center, as well as some other changes in customer services allocations between our power and water systems and the funds. As well, the final budget does reflect the most updated information on the snow forecast for the Owens and the Eastern Sierras. Based on that, while the budget does reflect a overall reduction in purchased water, the reduction amount has changed from what was shown in March based on more updated information. And we'll get to a slide on that as well. For the Power Revenue Fund, capital and O&M costs have decreased as well, primarily due to decreases within the Power Supply Replacement Program, Customer Relationship Management System, mail remittance processing, and some allocations between the Power and Water Fund. And then fuel and purchase power has decreased, and that's largely due to the savings we have in natural gas prices. Turning to the Power Revenue Fund, this before you is the key expenditure plan summary. Some highlights there under fuel and purchase power. Funding for non-renewables will decrease by approximately $140 million from approximately $1 billion to less than $900 million, which is the current year estimated. Funding for renewables will increase by $100 million from $400 to $500 million. CO2 emissions and other expenses. As you know, as we're transitioning away from coal, including Navajo, we won't need to purchase as much of the CO2 allowances as we look forward to the next fiscal year. Our revenue requirement is increasing by approximately $40 million, or roughly 3.08%. And capital infrastructure, we'll see there is an investment of an additional $117 million from the current year estimated expenditure level. This next slide just goes over our key programs that we use for the power system. Our power system reliability program, supply replacement program, customer opportunities, operating support, and others. For the highlights, I'm going to turn it over to our head of power, Mike.
So we can summarize our highlights in 3 areas. The first 2 examples are really about our transformation, moving from a coal and natural gas utility to a renewables-based utility moving forward. So the Barron Ridge Renewable Transmission Project we wanted to highlight because that is the highway that will bring renewables in from Mojave, Owens Valley, into the city of LA. So it's a very, very important project. We're in the completion phases of that project. So we wanted to highlight that. The other one is the Beacon Solar, not only the station, but the Beacon Solar projects, which are now under construction, and we'll see those being constructed throughout the rest of this year and into early next year. The second area is really about changing out our system to make it much more reliable in the future. And so a couple examples, we picked the pole replacement program, but this could be poles and cross arms and cables and transformers. But the goal is to get to 2,500 pole replacements, and we wanted to highlight that as a very critical part of our budget moving forward. And you'll see on the next page the Scattergood Olympic cable replacement at the top. That's also part of making our system much more robust, because with that cable replacement, it really helps the voltage down in the southern part of our system and makes it much more reliable. And the last 2 areas as examples are really our customer-facing programs. Is how are we enabling customers to interconnect to our system effectively, improving the processes for interconnection to our system, and really being the business driver and engine for business development in Los Angeles. And the last one is also trying to beautify our city through changing out above ground to underground cables and lines, relocating facilities, et cetera. So those are our 2 examples of customer-facing type investments.
Thank you, Mike. Turning to the Power Revenue Fund, this just displays our capital program and the expenditures going into 16-17. You'll see the first column being the actuals for the last completed fiscal year, the current year approved budget, the 15-16 current year estimated budget for the end of the year, and then the proposed budget, now approved budget for the 16-17. One thing to notice in the very top left-hand corner is the Customer Opportunities Program. If you look at the 14-15 level to the 16-17 level, you'll notice that the amount roughly doubles. You'll notice that for the 15-16, the approved, we are going to fall short of the current year approved budget in terms of our overall expenditures in the capital program. As Jeff mentioned earlier, a lot of that's really due to the fact that we were in the timing of the rate action. So we were holding off on some of the work until the rates were approved and we had secured funding going forward. Now that we have that approved just a little over a month ago, the new rates went into effect. Our groups in power system and water system are working very actively trying to catch up on our capital work. For operation and maintenance, O&M, what you'll notice there for power system is the amounts remain relatively flat overall. We really are trying to control those O&M costs as much as possible. Where we do see some changes will be the power system support decreases roughly $39 million due to Navajo O&M build expenses. PSRP increases of roughly $6 million. That's primarily for maintenance of our distribution assets, and some changes there in customer service, approximately $12 million, mainly from field services collection, account services, and others. And then power supply replacement increase of roughly $11 million, due mainly to the O&M for wind and solar plants. Next, we have fuel and purchased power. You'll see the amount there is now trending down as you look towards 16-17 from the current year. As indicated earlier, we are increasing the amount of funding for the coming fiscal year for renewables. Our non-renewables are decreasing by over $100 million, and our CO2 emission expenses are going down as we exit Navajo and have to purchase less allowances looking to the next fiscal year. Turning to the Water Revenue Fund. So here's our key expenditure plan summary. And some highlights there for you on this page would be the purchased water costs. So as you can see, the purchased water actuals for the 14-15 last completed year were $273. The approved budget, very, very similar, $272. The estimated $267. The proposed for 16-17, $198. So that is a nice reduction. Our O&M remains relatively flat overall. Revenue requirements are increasing by approximately $55 million, or roughly 4.9%. And then capital investment is increasing by over $108 million from the current year estimated. These are our key programs for the Water Revenue Fund: safe drinking water, water infrastructure, local water supply, regulatory compliance, customer service, operating support. There's some brief descriptions of each. And for our water system highlights, I'm going to turn it over to Marty.
So just a few of the key areas that we're working on in the water system. The first one is the one that's probably nearest and dearest to everyone's heart, and that's mainline replacement. We actually are, for the first time in many years, exceeding our current year's goal, but as you know, and we talked about during the rate process, we have a plan to accelerate that goal tremendously in the future. So we have a goal of 184,000 feet of main line for this coming year, and including in that is an overlay of earthquake resistant pipe, the special ductile iron pipe that'll help us to meet our resiliency goals. And so we are overlaying the issue of resiliency and being able to provide water following a catastrophic event over the mainline replacement program. So making sure that we accomplish as much as we can with that effort. Another big project this year is the Foothill Trunk Line. Councilman Fuentes knows about this one. It's in his district there. This is about 3 miles of 54-inch pipe, completing work that we'd started many years ago on a earlier section of it. So this is a big project that will help us with water supply in the northeast area of the San Fernando Valley. The Elysian Reservoir Water Quality Improvement Project. This is the cover on Elysian Reservoir. So this project's been talked about for a long time. The EIR was adopted not too long ago. So this will actually happen this coming year. On the next slide, water conservation continues to be a major investment for us, including continuing our turf rebate program. I just got off the phone with the radio interview on what the state's deciding for water regulations. That hearing's going on right now at the state board. But we know that the goals of the city are paramount to everything else. And no matter what the state does, we have goals as a city that we intend to meet to make sure that we're sustainable for the future. And so, so certainly these programs are there to support those goals and continue the efforts and the great progress that we've made. And then water recycling at the bottom. There's a lot of work going on water recycling. One of the most important things will be the Groundwater Replenishment Project, EIR, being certified this year, and that allows us to proceed moving forward in partnership with LA Sanitation for advanced treatment at the Tillman Water Reclamation Plant, so we can start recharging the San Fernando groundwater basin with advanced treated recycled water. So those are some of the highlights that we're looking forward to this coming year.
Moving on to the Water Revenue Fund capital expenditures trend. So you'll see there the capital ramp up from the 14-15 actuals, the 15-16 estimated from basically going from 719 to 942. And as we look forward to the proposed 16-17, that increase of roughly $108 million as well. Water infrastructure is increasing by $63 million, mainly for infrastructure reservoir improvements, distribution mains, and the Mid-Valley Water Facility. Local water supply is increasing as well for water recycling. Regulatory compliance is coming down slightly with the completion, I think, of supplemental dust control for Owens Lake Dust Mitigation Phase 7A. And then operating support increasing with the functional transfer of the fleet from power to joint, some changes in water system security, and water's various shares of joint expenditures, and then a customer service increase of roughly $27 million.
Neil, can I ask you a quick question there?
Yes.
Because the graph with the Power Revenue Fund and this one show customer service. How do you reconcile that? Because ostensibly it's the same CSRs and folks who are answering the call to determine whether it's a power or water thing. So how do you reconcile that? What does that mean for our expenditure plan for customer service? Hopefully, well, not hopefully, I know it's going up. So what does that mean, number one? And two, prior to this proposed fiscal year, there's no yellow in the customer service. So tell me what's different in the customer service category.
Certainly. So as we look at customer service is a joint function, joint service function. The costs are shared by both water and power revenue funds. What we're showing here on this slide for the water revenue fund is just its share of those costs. The increase in customer service.
I might add, this is capital, so customer service doesn't tend to spend a lot of capital, but if you look at the O&M, you'll see a more consistent funding stream, because all of the CSRs and call center and all that's O&M. Where they're spending a little bit of capital here.
So is that technology that?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, technology and contracts and such.
Got it. Okay.
For water O&M, you're going to see roughly, again, it remains relatively flat. There are some increases going from the approved budget and the current level of estimated expenditures from the current year to the next year, fiscal year 16-17. And then purchase water, as you can see, we discussed before, it is going down. Our snowpack, I think now the estimate is roughly 63%, Marty?
63, yeah.
And I think when we were looking at the preliminary budget, that time we didn't have final numbers. We were estimating a normal water year. So as we look at 63%, the savings that we had seen previously were greater than the level of savings we're seeing now, but it is still a reduction of almost $70 million. And then for staffing, this slide here shows our proposed staffing for 16-17. The left-hand column is the occupancy as of the month of April. You can see they're starting from the top down, total of 9,335, joint system, water system, and power system. And then looking forward into the 16-17 funded level, and you have joint, water, and power system as well. Below that, you have labor, overtime, and benefits, which is both the pensions and healthcare costs. Some important things to note: labor funding of roughly 1,025 positions above current occupancy, allocated primarily for implementation, enhancing customer service, office of sustainability, key programs for water and power, specifically capital infrastructure investment, succession planning. We did have a very high level of attrition so far realized this year of over 552 employees that are traded out as of April.
What percentage is that?
Off of 9,000.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's higher than we would normally see a trade out. I think our normal attrition patterns are roughly 200-300 maybe. So
6% of the workforce left.
Yeah.
There was a change in the mortality tables and a change in the discount rate. So it impacted some of the employees, and that's why we had a big attrition ahead of April 1st.
Are they in a, I mean, it's across the enterprise, obviously, but is there one division that's seeing more of a hit than the other?
It was pretty well across the board. It was just particular employees where their best retirement would have been through an annuity, and that would really impact it because of those two factors.
So that triggered that. So when we say that we've got about a 32% sort of attrition for eligible folks to retire, so we've realized 5%, sort of 6% is already left.
Already had.
Right.
Okay.
And the numbers that are able to trade out is actually increasing over the 5 years. I think we got up to roughly 40%
Yeah, it's
possibly.
40% in 5 years.
So help me understand that. So when you sort of look up news articles 10, 15 years ago, same thing, 30% eligible. Has that been constant? daily news article.
Yeah, for-
Ron K. You want to read this one? I don't know if you remember that one. That was pretty epic news article about the utility. It was about 15 years ago, and it said, that 30%. It seems like that sort of number doesn't change very much. That we're always it's a vulnerability.
For DWP, I know the demographics of our workforce because we really have a big bump coming between now and really the next 4 or 5 years. And then we went into, because of deregulation, we didn't hire for a while, so then we'll get a little more stable. But it's really something we've been expecting for a while, is this time frame to see a huge percentage of our workforce that can retire.
I guess what I'm saying is it's a constant sort of vulnerability, and I'm just wondering
It is.
what it is. Maybe at some point.
A little bit more now, though.
Yeah.
We can't. Maybe the board should look at that at some point, because we can't.
That's an excellent point. I think when we talk about the potential loss of staffing, experienced staffing, it's what we can do on that succession planning and that transition, transfer that knowledge and experience to the newer employees is very, very critical for us. So we're using a lot of interim authorities right now in the meantime, so before we lose some of those experienced staff, we can bring folks on board. This next slide is labor funding highlights for 16-17. As compared to our rate case, we're actually increasing the amount of in-house labor, which is offset by some reductions we have with proposed outside spending. What you can see there is the largest focus is on power infrastructure, PSRP program, and solar, roughly $69 million, or approximately 40% of the total change. Water infrastructure, roughly $34 million, or approximately 20%. CCB, class action lawsuit, that's about $42 million, or 25%. And then all others is roughly 25%, or $15 million. So now, if you compare that to the rate case, in the rate case for 16-17, the outside spending was at approximately 1.5, a little over 1.5 million. The 15-16 current year estimated outside spending is roughly 733 million. And then the proposed for 16-17 now, so it's less than what was in the rate case, is 1.29 billion. So the outside spending is still increasing by roughly 75%, but we're looking at is how much we're doing with in-house staff versus how much we're doing with outside contract forces. And so that was a change we had made subsequent from the preliminary budget to the final budget, was to increase the amount of labor funding.
But its impact on sort of the recent rate case, I mean, it's accounting. Any sort of significant impact to?
No, as mentioned earlier, actually, with the final budget we have for 16-17, we're actually going to have a slight decrease from the rate case. So it's 0.165% per year for power and 0.3% for water.
And even when you take out the either purchase water or fuel and purchase power, it's still within the amounts that we talked about in the rate case. It's really just taking out contract services and putting in some labor.
And some of what's happening for both Mike and I is timing issues. So in terms of timing and getting contracts on board versus also, because we had a plan to attack the body of work both with in-house forces and contracts. So there are some timing issues. One of the first pieces is to bring people on both to get contracts moving and administer those contracts as well as do some of the work. Ultimately, the goals are all still aligned. The budget's all still aligned. And so all the work will still be getting done. But it's the first phase of this is to bring some people on board.
And really, in about 2 to 3 years, with all the retirements that we're going to have, we're going to reduce the labor numbers to where we are today. And that's kind of the strategy. But you'll start to see that in year 2 and year 3.
So moving on to our next slide, this is the annual personnel resolution. LA Water and Power, roughly 10,015 authorized positions for the coming fiscal year. Really is a minimal change, I think one position from the current year APR. Water Revenue Fund share is roughly 3,434 positions. Below that is the breakdown between water system versus joint, funded by the Water Revenue Fund. And then for the Power Revenue Fund, it's 6,581 positions.
Neil, can you go back to slide 23? Just
Sure.
one item I just want to talk about. So the class action lawsuit, you see that roughly 25% of that additional labor funding. That is something that our costs that we see are going to hit us to comply with the class action lawsuit. So as we get that, we're going to put that into a regulatory asset. We'll be going to our board for that. So we will accumulate those costs. We will hopefully recover a significant portion of our costs as well. And then whatever that net amount is, then we'll spread that out to our customers going forward. But that is, just to clarify, that's not something where we had contract costs then. That is additional labor we're bringing in to comply with the settlement.
Remind me what that lawsuit is.
The billing
Billing
loss,
system.
the billing system loss.
The class act.
Yeah, class
Maybe you
act.
can explain a little bit about the regulatory asset, because that's an interesting mechanism.
Okay, so the regulatory asset is essentially, if we didn't do that, we would have to expense all these costs, and it would immediately hit our customers. What we're essentially doing is we put it in a regulatory asset that we're going to recover from future rates. So we accumulate what those costs are. We'll net out, reduce whatever we get from the lawsuit with PwC, and that remaining amount then we'll charge out to the customers. In the past, when we've had lawsuits like this, we've spread it out over 10 years. So it mitigates the impact to the customer, and it ensures that that we only charge our customers the net amount.
And in the unfortunate circumstances that we don't recover, then we'll spread that exposure to the rate base, i.e. customers,
Right.
slowly at some future date.
Generally over a 10-year period.
Right, but the point is that it's actually very beneficial to us until we sort of get through the fog of
Yes.
of this case here.
Right.
Quick question, even if, say, the fog stays with us for a while, and the labor funding increase chart that you have here in future years, do you see the share shrinking, and how long will it show up here?
For the CC, yeah.
Due to the
I mean,
class
we don't have anybody from customer service here today, but I know that they are basically the same thing, that you're going to have an uplift, a ramping up to comply with the lawsuit. As you get done with the compliance, then we're going to use through attrition to bring that down.
We've been using interim position authorities as opposed to changing the APR for those types of positions.
And essentially doing this, though, it has some other costs in terms of just, it's not a borrowing cost per se, because you're not actually borrowing money, but it is the cost of money that you're putting aside. And I assume we can still try to recover that cost as well.
Right.
Yes.
In theory, right?
Yep.
Oh, so this is a slide from our last presentation to our board. Basically just that our final budget package will be submitted to the mayor and the city council and other relevant stakeholders no later than May 31st, 2016 in compliance with the charter. And that concludes our presentation.
Mr. Blumenfield, any questions?
Yeah, curious how this budget would look different if the the Aliso Creek leak hadn't happened, and there's certain things that we know we have to do to promote reliability, because we had the whole discussion about potential blackouts that could occur. So clearly we need to do things a little differently to accommodate that. So how would this budget look different if we didn't have that whole Aliso Creek issue hanging over our head?
So many of the items that we're doing to help mitigate the impact of Aliso were part of our longer-term budget plan. So what we're seeing is an acceleration. So we have more budget dollars that are being expended in 16-17 as we try to deploy the additional batteries, additional demand response. But we're not changing overall projection of our budget. So you're just seeing it front-loaded into 16-17, and then we'll taper off. Originally, we had a slower ramp of some of these items.
So there's no cost to us, so to speak, that can be quantified? And
We are going to be collecting some of these additional acceleration costs because we may need to pay a premium to accelerate some of the battery storage. So that's an additional cost. We intend to collect those costs to the best of our ability. Now, one of the big costs are that operational flexibility as we change how we operate our system. So we won't know those costs until the end of summer. And those costs are a pass-through that are not anticipated in this budget. And we will be collecting that. So if we have a recovery mechanism, we fully intend to recover those costs.
you got to my next thought, which was, making sure that we're quantifying those costs and in case there is a recovery mechanism, which I assume that we're going to pursue at some point.
And I might add, we've done some of the things that are in this budget. For example, the AC tune-up program, that helps us across because it does reduce our gas usage in the basin. Those are the ones when we have a hot day, that's the gas we use. We're also looking at, the pool pump program that we had in, again, you heard during rates, that helps us a lot too. And if we can make sure our customers, and we're working on a communication plan so that they don't run those pool pumps between 1 and 5, which is, again, when we're using the critical gas units. So a lot of the stuff we have in the rates are helping us with Aliso Canyon.
On page 14 of the purchase water goes down substantially. Is that simply a function of that other graph where in terms of how much water we're at page 20 of, I guess it's the same point.
Page 2.
Yes,
They're both making the same point. So the question is,
Yes.
why are we getting such a reduction in our purchased water?
So this is really directly related to the LA Aqueduct deliveries. So this past year we had the lowest deliveries on record since the aqueduct was built, at about 32,000 acre feet of water. A normal year would be 250,000 acre feet of water. So this year, although we only got about 2/3 of the snowfall that we would have in a normal year and much less than we were hoping for, we're still going to see deliveries probably 100,000 plus acre feet of water to the city. So it's not as good as we would have hoped it would be, but it's a lot better than last year. And so when we have that aqueduct water, it directly offsets the Met purchase, one for one. So that water is coming to the city for free. We're also, Mike's generating hydroelectric power with it, so it's helping our renewable credits, plus the fact that we have free energy, and then that offsets what's becoming increasingly more costly Met water because their rates are going to go up, I think, 4 or 5% in July. So this will offset the water that we have to buy and offset those costs.
So it's not a function of expected rain next year or something?
Yeah, so it's basically based on this last hydrologic year, and then looking forward to the first 2 months of next year of hopefully normal winter time. So it's always, if I ever got this right, I'd be the world's greatest weatherman. But it's one of those numbers that change. But this is why it's important to have the aqueduct, and important for our customers for us to deliver every drop of water we can, because this is one for one out of their pocketbooks. This suggests several times a year, and those costs go up and down on their bills by how much water we have to buy.
On the water highlights, I didn't see groundwater cleanup, and maybe that's subsumed in the...
It's under, I didn't name it in the highlights, mostly because in the next year, that project is going. We have a date in 2021 that we will be in service, but at this point, so we're in design phase. We have our owner's rep on board, so there's money being spent, and the project is proceeding, but it's not a groundbreaking point yet or anything like that. There's all the behind-the-scenes work that's going on toward the project, so it'll hit future highlights. Right now, it's kind of just tough work in the office. So.
Especially because of the state money San Fernando Valley
Right.
Aquifer, but also the state money that's out there, I would have assumed we'd be leveraging a lot of our own money to be the biggest portion of that money.
Yes, we are. And you may recall we brought a project, this is probably pretty obscure, we brought a contract a number of months ago, and it's for the owner's rep. And so that contract brought on Hazen Sawyer as the lead consultant, acting on our behalf and for a design build process. And so we are working closely to that to get that to work and go toward design build. We are working very actively with the state. We have a request in for $317 million of Prop 1 funds. They haven't even finished setting the rules yet, but we have a pre-application in. And we're very careful to make sure the timing of the availability of those funds matches the timing of our construction. So we are working hand in hand with the state and very carefully ahead on this project to make sure that all the timing lines up for the funding, so we can minimize the cost to our ratepayers. We're also working with the polluters that EPA has identified to recover the greatest amount of money from them toward this project, again, to help our ratepayers out. But at this point, it's not when it gets to be a construction project, it'll be big dollars and a big highlight. Right now, it's all the behind-the-scenes groundwork being laid to go to construction.
And I would add, item 2, we're going to talk about securitization. That is one of the areas we're going to use securitization for, will be for groundwater cleanup.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of quick questions on the power system highlights. I think it's page 8. The Haskell switching station scheduled to be placed in service this month, has that occurred?
Yeah. Yes, construction has completed their finishing their final testing of that. We're very excited. We're going to recognize the employees for a tremendous job out there, and that's occurring at the end of this month. So that is this hub that's going to be connected then to Barron Ridge and Beacon, so you got terminus on both ends. So it's very important with the Barron Ridge transmission line between those two ends. Critical infrastructure for our renewables.
Terrific. I suspect there's quite a backstory with that chuckle. It must be a saga behind all that, getting it powered in time.
They did an amazing job despite cave-ins of soil, moving massive amounts of soil. So they had their series of setbacks, but they've recovered from each one of those. So real proud of the staff for pulling that together.
Terrific. And are we going to meet our pole replacement goals?
Yeah, we are absolutely ramping that up, and that's really for the power system. The number one goal is the power system reliability program, so it's poles and cross arms. So we're doing a couple things. We're trying to bring staff in to help with that, but we're also working on getting the contracts necessary so we can really ramp up and even go beyond the numbers that you see here.
There are places in my district where the poles have been delivered and are laying down and have, are tagged and ready to go. I was just curious about that. And then lastly, 15 years ago or so, there was an urban legend that it was about $1,000 per foot to underground utility lines. What's the going rate in 2016?
I don't have the number on the top of my head, and I'm not sure I have Marvin and staff. So that's something I'll have to get back to you on.
Just curious to see. I mean, we always hear it. It's rarely feasible, but people want underground.
That's a number I should get back to you.
Okay. And then lastly, thank you for not draining Silver Lake Reservoir into the gutter, but actually using the water. That's a story that should be told. And Marty, how many millions of cubic yards of water were in the reservoir?
So we saved somewhere in the neighborhood of about 200 million gallons. So 200 million gallons of water by bringing in a treatment process, and we drank the reservoir down as far as we could, treated it to drinking water quality standards, put it in the system until the point that we just could drink it no longer and the quality could not be treated. And so we preserved as much of that water as we could.
But well done, and that wasn't originally the plan, but people demand more. So I just wanted to compliment you on that.
Thank you.
Of course, no one talks about the good stuff, but that story should be told.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You all asked most of my questions. Let's invite the ratepayer up to come and opine on the budget. But as you all are sort of walking, Jeff, can you remind me what was this was heard in the board yesterday. What was their action?
They approved it.
Okay. Any changes?
Nope.
Okay. Can we change it? No.
I don't think so.
No. This is all for information only.
Right,
we just get to hear what they've done. And
I was looking for lawyers and on the CLA.
no, they can always try. No, I mean.
Yeah, I shouldn't say that, no. I mean, there's other ways. It's
we can't, and we appreciate the courtesy for you all coming and visit. Yeah, part of the reform conversation.
The one thing we wanted to highlight in this budget is a change from the rate proposal. Originally, the rate proposal had $160 million less in revenue, less in expense for labor, and DWP decided to didn't feel like it increased contracting quickly enough and wanted to switch that over to labor and felt they could increase that more quickly as part of the ramp up, both on the water and power side. Our concern is if they don't ramp up effectively and actually have finished projects and capitalize them, there could be an impact on rates. Sometimes when DWP is ramping up, they complete capital projects proportionally less, but they haven't wrapped up labor. Other times, the labor expenses get ahead of the capital projects, and it turns into O&M cost. And the O&M cost hits rates dollar per dollar, where capital expenses are extended out over a period and have about 1/14 the impact of a O&M cost difference. So
1/14?
1/14.
Wow.
So the question is, the issue is, let's monitor it, We recommended to the board that they watch this in quarterly metrics to make sure we're keeping up in that ramp up.
And in Power, what we're doing is we're making sure every new employee is charging to a capital project, and we're monitoring that to make sure they don't get charging to O&M jobs.
In the water system, we have 188 new positions. 180 of those are directly tied to capital work and only capital work.
Very good. Any additional comments or questions for our ratepayer advocate or staff? Okay, hearing and seeing none, colleagues, we'll go ahead and note and file this item in as much as it's just informational for our purposes only. Well, Mr. Prieto, number 2.
Certainly, Chair and members. Number 2 relates to report from DWP and CO reports relative to the establishment of Joint Powers Authority for water financing. Now, Mr. Chair and members, this matter was continued from your March 4th, 2015 meeting at the request of the committee to make certain adjustments to the ordinance.
Very good. We did have a pretty good conversation about this last time. You all made some changes. Maybe you could just tell us what those changes are, unless we need to have more of a refresher.
We had a brief presentation. If you'd like me to go through that, I can get it to work here. Hit the next page. There we go. And maybe just let me go through it just quickly. On page 2, this is just a tool that's been used previously since the 1990s, both in California and other states. It's an AB 850, which is established really by the City of Los Angeles, working with the state legislature, established a ability to have a separate non-bypassable right to collect debt service from customers. So this will be through a Joint Powers Authority. You know, we talked about the water cleanup in the San Fernando Valley. That's one area we would have it. But it can fund any capital investments that's driven by a state or federal mandate, which water quality, water recycling, water conservation, those things. It's something well tested and understood by the credit rating agencies and in the financial markets. So it's something that's going to save our customers. So if we go to the next slide, just the mechanics of it. The Joint Powers Authority, which we intend to establish with Burbank on page 3. So that Joint Powers Authority will issue debt. That debt will come from the investors, and those proceeds will come back and reimburse us for installing an asset. So the water system will put an asset in, whether by contract, whether by labor. We will get the money from that from the JPA. So this is as you can see in the bold, is the financing is legally isolated from our credit, from our bond credit, and it can obtain AAA bond ratings from that non-bypassable that's in the legislation. That's the key part of it. We will then charge it as a separate rate, as a volumetric rate to our customers as we move forward and we get that debt from the JPA. But again, the JPA will be us in Burbank, and much of the administration will be done by LADWP as well.
But not by the board. Yes, by the board, but how? I mean, because we're the collection, DWP is the collection agency for this refinancing.
Right.
But how?
So if you indulge me, we have about 2 slides, and I'll show you how we'll set that up. Just the benefits on it. There's really 2 main benefits you see in that first bullet, the lower rate impact. The first one is the 1.0 times on the debt service coverage. In other words, it is just the debt amount that we will have to collect from our customers. Compared to our financial metrics, if you remember from all the rate discussion, 1.7, so 70% more. That is the biggest benefit to our customers. It's because it's only the 1 times, we'll collect lower, and then there's significant rate savings, which I'll talk about in the next bullet. It also gives us AAA credit ratings, which is something that, despite we've had, again, because you all approved the rates, we've had spectacular bond issues over the last month. We had basically somewhere in the 3.2% area of our bond issues, about 6 basis points above AAA rating. So we've been doing very good. This will still be better than that. If you look at our estimates on the next bullet, It'll lower the water system revenues over the 5-year period by about $194 million or 13.5%. That was something that was in our rate package, but on a system-wide basis. And for the typical customer, it's going to save them about $10.56 or 15% for the typical customer. So it's a significant savings for our customers. And again, much of that, just from a financial perspective, is it preserves the water system's debt capacity. Go to the next one, Neil. Just where has this been used in the past? California Department of Water Resources issued about $6 billion through the part of the energy crisis. The Long Island Power Authority, so the now CEO of the Long Island Power Authority used to be one of the bankers that helped us to work and set this up with AB 850. He has now set up a very identical process in LIPA, and they are using it $3.7 billion of bonds. Hawaii has done it. Nebraska has done it. You can see from the color chart, really around the outside, the coast of outside of Nebraska, people are using these same types of tools moving forward to save money. Next page just shows the summary of our capital program. If you look at those red bars, so that's going to be what we plan on using securitization. And you can see on the right-hand side, the JPA will be about little under $1.5 billion over the 5-year. We're still going to be issuing debt. You can see in the green about $2.7 billion of conventional debt. But this is, council member, when you talked about the cleaning up of the San Fernando Valley, this is one of the areas we can use this for, and we plan on using it for. Now, this does sunset in 2020. However, we think if it's positive, it's working, it's saving money, it's something that we could hopefully extend as well. So that's part of the demonstration we'll be doing over the next couple of years. And then, council member, to your question, if you look down the bottom, the approval process. So anytime before any issuance of rate reduction bonds, which is the securitization we're talking about, it would go to the Board of Commissioners for approval of the financing application, comes to City Council for the approval of the financing application as well. Then it goes to the JPA for financing, and then approval of the financing by the California Pollution Financing Control Authority. We'll have to do a Prop 218, and then we'll finally issue the bond. So that in itself will be about a 4 to 6 month process that we're going to have to do every year to issue these bonds. But again, it's worth it because the amount of money we're going to save our ratepayers by doing this. Just right up above that on the next steps, we needed to get through the rate process to do this. We've now successfully done that. This is the next key step to save our customers a significant amount of money. We're coming here for the energy environment. Hopefully we get it approved here. Hopefully to the LA City Council. We'll then have to do some work with Burbank City Council. They have, Peter, has Burbank, they have approved it?
Not yet.
Not yet. They're waiting for us.
Yes.
And so once we get that, then we'll go back, hopefully get it from Burbank, and then we'll have to organize and execute the various JPA documents. We'll have to work with rating agencies, bankers, financial advisors, including some stress testing by the rating agencies as well. We know what that is. We're confident we can go through and execute that. And then we'll go in to start issuing the bonds at that point.
Mr. Blumenfield.
I remember when the state did this in the 90s, right? They were sued by Turn, and
The Utility Reform Network.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you guys know. And I think we won that, or the state won that, but there was an argument about the ratepayer not getting the full value. They were arguing that it should have been a higher percentage of the rate. That somehow, have we looked at that in terms of the problems that they had to overcome, and do we have any similar problems?
I don't think we'll have that problem, but again, we'll talk to our legal counsel about that to ensure. I mean, I'll have to go back and research it. I'm unaware. That would sound like something between an investor-owned utilities getting some benefit versus the customers, which we don't have that
I guess
issue.
that's the issue, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but we have taxpayers versus ratepayers. It's the same. It was the IOUs got a group. The IBEC
Right.
did it for the state, and then they were suing, saying that the ratepayers weren't getting the full value.
The full value of it,
IOU was taking some of that value, and I don't know if we would have some,
And
it's not exactly.
In this case, because it'd be on the water and power bill, the ratepayer would get the full value. The difference is they'd pay less overall from, you know.
Good afternoon, Councilmember. Joseph Private, General Counsel for DWP. We don't have any of those concerns with this JPA that's being proposed here. So we early on were aware of going back a couple of years now in formulating this, we're aware of the turn situation. And again, we don't see those issues arising in the JPA formation that we're talking about here.
Great, that's a good thing. Are there any risks that we should be aware of for this kind of, I mean, it's almost a no-brainer. It seems like a great financial mechanism to securitize at a lower rate. I mean, what could be wrong with it? But so I guess
probably the only challenge I would say, which is again a good reason why it's been delayed some, is we've got to make sure our billing system can bill for it separately as well, which we think, you know, we have that set up as well. But that's something we've got to work through.
Okay, and whether or not other cities join our JPA, that doesn't really matter to us, right?
As long as we have one of them join us.
And so it's not going to change anything in our world if they join or don't join.
Yeah, we had to have a partner of a certain size to qualify under the law, and that's so.
Great, thank you.
Mr. O'Farrell?
Thank you, sir. With respect to the improved credit rating and the estimated 50% reduction to the typical monthly bill, what's the math between that savings versus the anticipated increased water costs with the new rate increases? In other words, where I'm going is this is a significant savings because of the lower credit rating, and I'm not so sure ratepayers even know about this benefit.
Right. So this was something that we included in.
You did.
We included this in the rate case, that we would have the securitization.
All right.
So it would be, if we don't do it, it's the 15% would be higher than what was in the rate case.
Right. Okay. So that's what was communicated throughout the whole.
Kept the rates low.
process.
Yeah, kept the rates low.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Pickle, would you like to come up and speak to this a little bit? And as Dr. Pickle's coming up, just a quick question for you. I think it came up in the IEA study, or I don't know if it was Mr. Pickle's report on the rate case, but there was a recommendation to have the utility begin to do some studies on how highly leveraged the utility is. Yes. And to me, this sort of is very welcome in part, but in other parts, it speaks to how leveraged the utility is becoming. We're now pursuing different leveraging securitization schemes to cut costs. Has the board taken an action to begin the studies on how highly, because that was a recommendation, ostensibly they're the only ones that could order that?
The board has not taken any action on that. Again, you know, we're just short into the new rates.
Have they taken any action on any of the IEA recommendations?
We're working through on the management side. Marcy has sent out, in fact, I think in the next week or so, we're going to get responses back from management on a number of those different things, and then we'll present that to the board. And they did ask that and what the response is on a number of those. Obviously, the governance was a big part of the IEA. There's, as you know, a lot of that is already working its way through.
There's the metrics reporting too,
Yeah.
and we did go to the board. They did approve the, I think it's 49 metrics.
Right.
And then we'll be going to the board next month with some additional labor metrics that we've discussed and worked on collaboration with the RPA.
Yeah, no, again, I want to hear from Dr. Pickle, but I mean, I think this directly speaks to how highly leveraged the utility is and how much more capacity we can squeak out by doing this. But at some point, we're going to run out of room.
And in fact, that's why you see the big reduction with the use of this, is because we run up against that 65% debt limit. Because we have so much capital spending from all of the mandates, from doing the infrastructure, that's why we consider this a really critical tool.
Great. Dr. Pickle.
The risk over the next 3 to 7 years will be, can we have a significant joint partner? And what might happen if we don't achieve that? Presumably, we may have to unwind the JPA. At which point there would have to be a refinancing and recovery of some of the benefits.
And so we started off with Glendale in, they got out. Is that right? And it's Burbank
We,
that's stuck
we
in
actually talked to MWD, MWD as a whole, and there was interest, but not every city was comfortable because they didn't really understand the whole process, and a lot of the member agencies were actually too small to personally join, and so they didn't see exactly how it might apply to them as a benefit. And so we sought Burbank as a partner who we have a lot of dealings with in a number of areas and who met the size requirement under the laws, and they were willing to work with us on this. It was MWD originally.
And one other component is they've done so well on their debt financings that the cost of debt has come down very close to the AAA. The challenge is for that debt, we have to raise pay-as-you-go capital, which is more expensive. The benefit here is this is 100% debt.
Got it. Very good. Colleagues, hearing and seeing no. Mr. Blumenfield?
So who else are we pursuing so that we're not dependent on just Burbank?
We don't have anybody else that we're actually trying to pursue at this point. We have other people that are potentially interested. I think everyone's trying to, this is a new thing in the water business since this bond came out, so everyone's trying to find out how this might play out. We have other partners in the city family. Some of the joint projects with LA Sanitation could benefit from this as a city family. So we may be able to grow in the city how we use these funds, but as far as the partner outside the city, we don't have another partner lined up at this point. But if there is interest by somebody who thinks they could take advantage of helping their own capital position, then we certainly would welcome that.
Would a city partner qualify?
We're only as the city of LA on our side, so we're all in it together in this side.
What about like the ports or the airport or anything like that?
It'd still be part of the city, yeah.
So legally we need another.
We need an outside partner, but what we are looking to leverage is for the broader water issues that we're facing, that we deal with water supply, recycled water, and things like that.
WD are they done or they're still thinking about it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's out of the question, but there's the member agencies have very different motivations, and some of them are wholesalers, some are retailers. There's a very different geography, and they just couldn't get enough people to feel comfortable in time for us to move ahead. So it's not out of the question, though. They would have some benefit.
And again, council member, as you saw with this, it is a no-brainer, so it's something that we've just got to work better. Burbank, among others, I would think we'd have a lot of people that want to do it to save the money, but even when you see smaller municipal utilities, they don't even tend to want to issue debt. So now here's another level of complexity on top of that, but we're going to work with them to move forward.
Great. Okay, very good, colleagues. If there's no objection, let's move to approve the department's request for authority to establish a joint powers authority for water project financing with the city of Burbank, specifically resolutions number 015-151 and 015-168, and the revised ordinance dated March 25th, 2015 on the city attorney transmittal, and note and file the remaining reports. That shall be the order.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 3, Mr. Prieto.
Certainly, item number 3 relates to DWP and CO reports relative to First Amendment to agreements with Sustainable Power Group related to the Beacon Solar Project.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Brian Koch. I'm the Resource Planning Manager in the Power System Planning Division. Briefly, we're going to go through this item and just highlight it very briefly for you. This is the Beacon project you saw discussions about earlier. There are 5 sites on the Beacon site. This is for 3 of the 5. It's about 162 megawatts out of the 250 megawatt total. It's about 1.5% of our RPS. We've been at this committee and the council before for similar changes on other PPAs. This is a change driven by financing changes and tax equity changes for the developer, which is Sustainable Power, also known as S-Power. In exchange for the changes that they requested, which are changes in dates and some of the financing conditions and some date changes on the buyout options, we negotiated a price reduction of $2 per megawatt hour, which works out to about $20 million over the 25-year term. So we believe that we've gotten a good value for these changes. The energy will still be available very close to when we originally expected it, and will be available sometime completely through the end of this year and into the beginning part of next year. One of these sites is already under construction by S-Power, and the remainder will follow upon approval of this when they can get the rest of their financing.
Now, this was previously the Hecate project?
This was.
So what happened?
This was a decision by the developer to to sell the project Hecate, to sell out, and S-Power was the developer that took it over. That was a final financial decision on their side, and they've progressed the project and again are under construction now.
So in this case, it sounds like the amendments actually benefit us because you negotiated better terms. But sort of going forward, when you get into these agreements with folks, are we ever at a risk that we don't get favor? I mean, if we don't approve this, there's a chance that they would default because they can't get the financing that they need. But it's working towards our benefit. If Hecate or some other developer decides to sell the project after we've gotten into an agreement, I could see a situation where we don't have a choice. We have to sort of do what they need us to do, otherwise we put into jeopardy some things. Are we thinking about that as we draft these contracts? Is there a way for us to safeguard the utilities' interests better? Again, in this case it worked out, but is there a lesson learned here?
Well, we have had, in this case, we did have a consent to the transfer. So you have to do due diligence to make sure that you believe you've got a comparable or a better developer that's taking over from the original.
Oh, so we had to agree.
We did have to agree.
Okay. All right.
The consent occurred separately. That's done at our side. And then this change has to come down to the city council.
Council member, Robert Roth, CIO's office. Excuse me. In addition to what was just mentioned, there's also a letter of credit in the event of a complete failure to deliver. Each of the sites has approximately $10 million that's allocated to the department in the event, on a daily basis, in the event they just don't deliver. So I'm not sure if that furthers your concern of it's how they're addressing it.
Great. Any questions, colleagues? Mr. Blumenfield?
Just generally, it's not costing us, giving them the extra 2 years is all, is there any negative? Let me put it in a question. Is there anything that it's costing us to give them the extra 2 years?
No, it's not. We didn't expect to buy it out in the first 5 years anyway, so I don't think it changes the equation of cost at all. It just changes the date.
And the department is anticipating achieving their RPS goals for 2016. In fact, I believe it's safe to say exceeding them by 1% or so. And this is not seen as impacting the department's ability to achieve that.
So, great. Thank you. Mr. O'Farrell?
Just to follow up on your question, are these provisions standard for these types of agreements in terms of the guarantees?
We see them in all of them. There's some sort of, maybe there's an exception. Maybe there is an exception, but I don't know of any.
Not in this type. It's always in there.
Thank you.
Very good, colleagues. Hearing and seeing no additional questions, and there are no speaker cards. Well done, Mr. Prieto. The recommendation will be to approve the department's request for authority to execute the First Amendment to power purchase agreements with the Sustainable Power Group relating to the Beacon Solar Project. Hearing and seeing no objection, that shall be the order. That brings us to the conclusion of our meeting. We don't have any public comment cards.
Oh.
What do y'all want to do now?
Enjoy the moment.
Okay, we're adjourned.